All right, well, we are about a minute past here, so we'll go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome everyone to Officiants Online, a virtual forum for professional wedding officiants to share their expertise. I'm Marissa, I'm the Marketing and Events Manager at AMM, and I'm here with my co-host Jessica, AMM's lead writer, who will be helping out behind the scenes. So please send her a message if you have any technical questions. Today, we are joined by Liz Ray of Liz Ray & Co. Liz Ray is a professional wedding officiant with over a decade of experience in the industry. She began officiating when she was originally asked to officiate a friend's wedding back in 2014. And after seeing a lack of officiants in her market that accommodated to the LGBTQ plus community and noticing a distinct lack of officiants with a background in writing and public speaking, Liz launched her business in Minneapolis. She set out with a goal to give couples a safe space and officiate an officiant who would dive into their ceremony, handwrite it without templates, and lead the way for an acceptance in the industry. After a year, Liz was booked over 50 times, and as of writing this, she has officiated hundreds of weddings with over two continents, and in multiple languages. Each of the officiants who work with Liz Ray Weddings has experience in both writing and public speaking, as well as a story of training with Liz. So she's very well versed in public speaking and writing, and that's what we're all here to talk about today. So I'll go ahead and pass things over to Liz, and we'll open things up for questions after her presentation. But Liz, go ahead and take over.
Well, hi, everyone. I'm like, oh my gosh, I was gonna say familiar faces, but I guess familiar names because I can't see your faces, so never mind. It's nice to see familiar names. And hi, I am calling, dialing in from Spain where it's night and I'm still sweating. Throughout this, obviously, feel free to drop in comments, say hi. It's always weird to talk to myself for a brief amount of time. But yeah, anywho, I'm Liz. We're gonna talk about crafting story for ceremonies and writing ceremonies that don't sound like everyone else's. There we go. In case you're wondering why you're here or why I'm here, I'm gonna give a wee bit of information about me. I feel like Marissa already kind of did a good job and shared things that I actually forgot about. So thank you, Marissa. We'll talk about asking the right questions, finding the story, building a theme, weaving story into that structure, delivering the ceremony well, and then Q&A. That also being said, feel free to drop questions into the Q&A at any time. I will try to monitor the chat at the same time, but it's very awkward to just talk to myself. So I like to try to make these kind of interactive. So yeah, ask questions or drop comments or share your favorite GIF. I do love a good GIF or GIF, however you say it. I think it's GIF. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's GIF. So anywho, if you're wondering who let me speak, besides AMM, this is just a wee bit about me. Some of this Marissa already covered, but more fun stuff that I don't usually put on the website. I know a lot of weird personal stories about people, thanks to this job. So we'll talk more about that later, but definitely some things that I'm like, all right. I do think I'm better known across the board for my GIF game. I'm really good with GIFs. If you want to follow me or see any of my memes or wedding work, that's my handle below. But yes, I have been officiating since basically I was a child, quite literally. Came out of college and basically started this gig. I speak a lot of languages. Spanish is probably the best one. The others are, hit or miss. Sometimes confuse them all. But yeah, so I work in a lot of states and countries. That's primarily because I traveled a lot in my 20s and lived a lot of places. So dialing in from Spain because I decided to escape the US a little bit and practice my Spanish in one of the hardest accents in the world. So that's the quick background about me. And if you're wondering what a personal wedding ceremony is, I'm sure you probably have an idea of what personal is, but figure we'll go into a little more depth so you have an idea of what it is I'm actually covering today. And it is not ChatGPT ceremonies, I'm sorry. So a story for ceremony isn't a fill in the blank ceremony or chronological recap of facts. So not a timeline of a couple's events. It's not generic or recycled phrases like they were best friends, or it might be if you use them correctly. I've seen a lot of kind of not very story focused ceremonies kind of give a whole basically introduction and then rush into things like rings, vows, I do's, whatever else you have in there, and it kind of leaves the end hanging. So it feels more like a speech at the beginning, and then, oh yeah, here's the important stuff. So the last thing we want to do is make Britney Spears yawn. Nobody wants that. And this is why good stories really matter. So if you've ever been to a wedding and you've remembered the ceremony, or if you haven't remembered the ceremony, hopefully you're here to make memories for other couples. But a lot of the times, the ceremonies that people remember the most are the ones where they remember how it felt. So either it was a really great story, or the story was told really well, or they connected to the ceremony on an emotional level in some way. It also makes the couple feel seen. So if, for example, you're a couple getting married, you probably know your timeline and events. And ideally, if you were invited to a wedding, you probably also know the couple's timeline and events. However, sharing a story and sharing ceremonies that have that more story focus help couples feel seen and feel like their ceremony is more than just like a recap of their life. It lets them reflect on those moments. It lets them laugh and kind of live in that moment instead of being like, oh yeah, yeah, we met in 2014, yada yada yada. And if you're wondering how the heck we even do this without doing a chronological time of events, here's what we do. First step is getting better information. I always tell people it's better to have way too much information than way too little information. It's a lot easier to cut down from a lot of info than dealing with just a little bit of information. So, for example, instead of saying how or asking how a couple met, you could ask, what were your first impressions when you guys met? How did you feel? Were you surprised that they looked the same as their Bumble profile? Things to kind of pull out what those emotions were, not necessarily when they just met, but throughout the whole time of their relationship. So a lot of times when I'm speaking to couples, we'll talk about the good, but we'll also talk about the not so great. So, for example, if they had struggles, we talk about how they worked through it, what kept them moving through it, how did they become stronger because of it. I'll talk to them about what it was like meeting family. Were they nervous? Were they scared? Anything you can do to ask really, really emotional questions, things to kind of pull out what those emotions were at any given point in their relationship will really help grasp onto that. Oh, oh, so that's what happened when you met moment versus like, oh yeah, they met on Tinder, or they met at a friend party. Cool. Yeah, it was great. Love at first sight. Move on. It really digs into those emotions. And a lot of times couple kind of forget about it. And it reminds them of what it was like when they first met or when they first had their friends over for dinner. I'm just making up random stuff, but whatever that moment was. Now, on top of asking very specific questions, you also want to get very weirdly specific. And I'm saying like, don't ask the surface level, ask really weird things. Like, what did they do during the pandemic if they were dating then? What kind of bread did they make? What kind of cocktails are their favorite? Get weirdly specific. And the reason I bring this up is because you never really know what nugget of information is going to enlighten a whole ceremony. So, for example, you might have a couple that is like, we absolutely love this board game, and this is why, and this is the memories. And that could be the entire theme for the ceremony. Probably not, but something like that. The more specific you can get, the more it uncovers other stories for that couple too. For example, if during that first date story, they tell you exactly where they met, what the bar or the restaurant or whatever it might have been was like, it might uncover how they feel in certain areas or that they really like to try new cocktails. And that can help you figure out other questions to ask that kind of go beyond that surface level of, you know, met, got engaged, now they're getting married. So get weirdly specific. I always like to preface with couples that I will ask them very specific questions And I will also ask for a lot of information, but I will also know what not to put in a ceremony. So if you're like, oh my God, are the couple's okay with this? Yes, just make sure to preface why. I also like to make sure that when I'm talking to couples, whether it's even a couple I know, or even, for example, my sister and her fiance are getting engaged, I like to make sure it's not just an interview, but I'm also writing observations about that couple. And you can do this even if on Zoom or if you're having a coffee with them and asking them questions. I really like to make sure that I see how they talk about moments. Like, for example, are they tearing up with memories when they talk about how they first met? Are they laughing about their uh very first Thanksgiving together? Are they trying to hold back tears when they talk about being long distance? It's definitely helpful to take note of those things because when you go to tell those stories or talk about a couple, you can reference that interaction that they have with each other and in general what they're like as a couple. You'll get to be able to see if they're funny, if they are more romantic. For example, if a couple is very close in PDA, you'll know they're a little more romantic, probably than a couple that likes their space, that likes some air to breathe. It's definitely helpful to note all the things that they don't say just to kind of add that extra layer in. And if you want to go even a level above, and something I also would suggest doing because you really don't know what you're going to get, is ask their family and friends some general questions. You can do this just via email. I send out a video form to make it easier. You don't have to meet with them, you totally can, but I like video or audio because it gives me an idea of what a couple's like. But ask the friends, some of their favorite memories, what the couple's like, traits about them. Now, sometimes this is helpful because you might get the same answer from everyone, and that will help you say, okay, yeah, this couple is really, really funny. Or you might get totally different answers, and you have to pick out like, okay, this actually might be interesting to share, or wow, that story was different. Definitely not going to share that in the ceremony, but good to get a well-rounded view of the couple. It can sometimes help add that layer or confirm a suspicion you have about a couple. Like if you're like, I think this couple is really funny, at least from what I can tell, talking to them. But if their friends are also like, oh my God, they're the funniest couple, then you definitely know the couple's funny and it's an okay angle to take. Heard some really interesting stories from friends. So sometimes it's just like it's a good way to entertain yourself. Um, I like to make these interactive because it feels very weird to just talk to myself. So I figured, whether you're officiating one and done kind of times, or if you keep officiating forever, write down a question that you'll ask every couple from now on, or your only couple if you're officiating a family friend's wedding, and that might be it. Feel free to share them in the chat if you want to. Um, I'm trying to think. A couple question that I really like to ask couples is what is like the weirdest thing about each other? And not necessarily because I'm going to share it, but sometimes it can pull out just like the way that they interact because they usually laugh a little bit. And sometimes like I'll get a sense of if they're funny or not, or if they're like, oh my God, I hate when he leaves the laundry behind, like biggest pet peeve. So that's usually a question I like to ask. That's a very surface level one, but just an example. And don't feel like you don't have to share if you don't want to, but yes, okay. Jessica, what would you do for fun on a 10-hour layover? Okay, that's a really tough question, actually. I mean, it's a good one. It's a good one. But yeah, drop them in the chat. I'd love to hear them. I'm like, Jessica knows. I feel like Jessica, you know that I travel. So I'm like, I could tell you what I could do in a 10-hour layover. A lot. You can do a lot in 10 hours. You can see a whole country. Um, the next step is finding the right story and theme. So once you have all this information and you're like, oh God, it's so much information. What do I do? Now it's time to narrow it down. It's a lot easier when you have a lot of information to narrow it down, surprisingly enough, than when you only have a little bit. When you have a little bit of information, it's kind of hard to like figure out a theme without it being a very big cliche. So I really like to pick one or two defining moments. They typically tend to be the beginning, a challenge the couple went through, a change. I try not to have an engagement story, or if you're a parent. Um, I'm hit or miss on this, but I really don't recommend a birth story. I know the dads love it, but one of two rule of thumbs for officiating weddings is no no bodily liquids in the ceremony, and this is one of them. So every now and then it works, but ideally it's usually not the engagement story or a birthing story. However, it could be, for example, uh the moment a couple reconnected after being long distance, or I have a couple where we're talking about they've been long distance for like 7 years and talking about kind of the moment they got legally married. So they got legally, we're doing the ceremony later. I try to pick out a story that really defines who they are as a couple, their personality, how they interact, um, something that I think people, say the audience, guests haven't heard before. Most people know the engagement story, or they can read it on their website if they choose to, but it also gives it a little bit extra edge of, oh, when you're starting off with a couple stories that people have not heard. Next, we'll want to build a central theme. So we don't want to get lost along your ceremony journey and go through a whole winding wave of different stories, and you're like, is this a ceremony? So these are some very kind of cliched examples, but for example, as you go through these stories, you probably come across something that a couple exemplifies. So, for example, this couple that I'm working with that has been long distance for what feels like a million years, home is wherever they are. So that could be with family, it could be in their respective countries, it could be on a Zoom call, or I guess more likely a FaceTime. It could be, whatever it is. I always like to use the example of Taylor Swift because, yes, I'm a Swiftie. Please don't judge me. But she is a really good storyteller. So you can't deny that. But you'll notice with every single one of her songs, she has a theme. And if she can do it, we can all kind of do it. Maybe not to her level, but like a similar level, like a toned down level. She is the pro. Um, to figure out what that through storyline is, and something that has kind of exemplified over the years that they're together. And you don't have to go super in depth. It could be they always choose each other, but something so that way when you're constructing the ceremony, you're like, oh, I definitely want to, share stories that fit along this theme, or tell their story in a way that follows this narrative. And speaking of that, those stories should all go back to that theme. So instead of sharing an entire timeline of events, think of picking just a few stories or a few particular moments that reflect back on that theme. And if you're going through all of the stuff that you have about a couple and it does not fit that theme, omit it. I will say cut it. You don't need it. That theme should act as a way to reinforce and kind of hit hard emotionally. So when you're starting off with the story in the beginning of that ceremony, at the end and at different points in the ceremony, you can kind of keep lightly touching on that theme or sharing stories on the themes. That way people are like, oh God, of course, like they are each other's home. Love is home. So they're, crying happy tears, and they really get it, and they get that emotional connection. Now, just to make it even more complicated, if you are working on a current ceremony, feel free to drop a theme that you think maybe might fit, or a sample theme that you haven't seen in a wedding ceremony that you would really like to see. I'll give you guys like a moment or two. Sabra, yes. Sabra, oh my gosh, I'm pronouncing your name wrong live. That's terrible. Yes, you will get them. What would you do if your date got sick on their first date? Oh, wow, that's a really good question, Jennifer. Dang. Uh, yeah, I don't even know what I would do. I can't read, Deborah. Don't mind me. It's hot here in Spain, so the sweat's getting to me. If anyone has a theme they would like to drop in, feel free to go for it. I can also roll off some off the top of my tongue. Like I have multiple. Happily ever after, that's a good one. I mean, it's definitely fit for a wedding, that's for sure. I'm asking you guys the hard questions at the end of your work day or the start. For me, I start working at like this time of day. So next, pretty obvious, we're gonna write the ceremony. So pretty easy. This might look like a lot, and this is something I've referenced before, but if you haven't taken a writing class or haven't like randomly read a book or, done a screenwriting course in general, there's something called the hero's journey. And I like to apply this to ceremonies because I think it gives ceremonies a very well-rounded view. So this is going to look like a lot. Reference it later. Don't worry about it. Basically, the gist of this is that, for example, Act One is an ordinary world. If you think of, for example, Harry Potter, Harry's just living his little life. All of a sudden, they come and get him, and they say you're a wizard, and he has to make a decision if he goes or not. So he does. The second act is in the adventure. Harry goes on an adventure. Well, hopefully you all know what happens. And if you haven't seen or watched Harry Potter, I mean, you really have to. Like, you really have to. It's really good. He goes on a journey. He becomes a wizard. He meets friends, etc., etc. And then the third act, depending on the book or the movie for Harry Potter, is something happens. There's a choice to be made. For example, typically with Harry Potter, he's fighting Voldemort in every single one, and then there's a resolution. So that's a pretty good example. And if you're like, what the heck am I supposed to apply this to a wedding ceremony? Don't worry, it's very easy. So this is my really bad rendition of what this looks like. I'm not an artist and I cannot get ChatGPT to draw this out for me perfectly. So here we go. For example, in your wedding ceremony, you'll probably have an introduction, probably vows, ring exchange. You might have I do's, unity, closing. Now, if you have readings, other things, obviously they kind of like sprinkle in here and they should reinforce what's going on. But we'll talk about that in a second. For example, say we were writing Harry Potter's wedding ceremony if he was going to marry Hermione, which sadly he never does, but point aside. Say at the beginning, Harry is called off to go to, become a wizard. He meets Hermione. That's kind of the beginning of your wedding ceremony. And in that beginning, you'll want to talk about how their friendship grew, how their relationship grew. Those stories that kind of hit home on the theme. Now, as you go into the vows and the rings, you might talk about how family plays more into this, or who supported them along the way, or things and roadblocks that might have challenged them that they overcame. So, for example, in Harry Potter's case, he has a lot of roadblocks, a lot of challenges that are thrown at him. If he was getting married, he might talk about how him and Hermione overcame those together. Now, as you go into the I do's and kind of closing it out, you want to talk more about like how this actually reflects in their marriage. So all these things that they went through, all the things in a hypothetical Harry and Hermione wedding ceremony that they went through, how that made them a better couple, what their marriage will look like, what the future looks like, how they shared things that maybe they don't share with anyone else. And in the closing, you want to kind of leave it on that hit back to the theme, and also share, yes, this is what the future looks like, and this is how we ended up here. Yeah, we'll never see Harry and Hermione, but one can dream. One can dream. I always reference not using a timeline to tell a wedding, to share a wedding ceremony. Sometimes a timeline makes sense, but a lot of times when we start yawning during a wedding ceremony is when we're like, oh yeah, here we go. There's a funny story about how they met. There's some weird jokes, et cetera, et cetera. We kind of know where this is going. Instead, a lot of times when you start a book or a play or a movie, it starts in the action. It never starts quite at the beginning. Like, for example, with Harry Potter, it doesn't start when he's born. It starts, with the letters. It starts in the closet. It starts, with all those things going on. You want to do the same thing when you are writing your wedding ceremony. So when you think back to those one or two kind of big moments, that might be your starting point. For example, with this couple that I'm working with that's been long distance for 5 bajillion years, we're starting off with the moment that they actually got married, because for them, the legal ceremony was not complicated, just more complicated because they were living in other countries and yada, yada, yada. So we're starting off with that to talk about how we kind of ended up there and start in the moment and be like, oh, okay. And you want to bring in those emotions by kind of starting off with something that feels like, oh, we're starting off in the moment. All right, this is interesting. Here we go. Virginia, to answer your question, uh, you know what? In this day and age, it wouldn't be a shock if people had given up on finding one another. The dating world is pretty rough out there. It depends. Depends on the story. So, for example, again, it always depends. I would say I would figure out what the storyline is and, kind of all the things that they went through. I've had a couple couples. So, for example, a lot of times when couples are marrying 30s and older, they date faster because they're not figuring out their lives. They kind of know who they are. And a lot of times they have kind of stopped trying or it's not their primary focus usually. Work, friends, school. So you could phrase it like that, where it's like, you could start off the ceremony like they were living their lives. They were having friendships and doing their thing and then they met each other. I think that might be a way to go about it. If that helps a little bit. Let me know if that made sense. Again, sometimes it depends, but hopefully that helps. And there's always ways to frame kind of in general some of those cliches. Like, for example, when we talk about like they were best friends, instead of saying they were best friends, there's a lot of ways to show that even in that story arc. For example, if they actually started as best friends, you could start the ceremony talking about, um, they, like, for example, I have a couple that was actually best friends. I'm actually meeting with them right after this. We talk about how in the beginning of their relationship, everyone kind of knew, but kind of didn't. How they went on a first date and it was really weird and they didn't like it. So they tried going on a second, date and hanging out on the couch and just making a pie. So we kind of phrase those really obvious cliches of like they were best friends in ways through stories instead of saying it. So that can also be an example, also in your case, Virginia, but in general, where we want to show the moment. So instead of saying it, we bring out those examples. We talk about how a couple baked a pie together instead of going on a first date because it was really weird and they didn't know how to interact formally because they'd always been friends. So there's ways to go around it. And then cut the fluff. I'm a big fan of, even though I say get as much information as possible, I'm really big on cutting ish out, cutting it out. Uh, a lot of times I've been to ceremonies where we have like a casual reading thrown in, a random unity. Something I tell couples and something that I find really helpful when thinking about this when working on ceremonies is, does this help tell the story? For example, do we need a reading, especially if the couple like doesn't read, if they're not big readers? If they are big readers, then yeah, maybe. Or do we need a unity ceremony? Does it feel kind of cringe? Is it like trying too hard? If you're asking the right questions and getting a lot of information, you should have plenty to work with in that introduction and kind of throughout the rest of the ceremony. But I always say, kind of like in movies, cut the scene if it doesn't add to the theme. I did not mean for that to rhyme. Yeah, cut the scene if it doesn't add to the theme, if it doesn't add to actually telling their story. Sometimes just telling their story versus having a random reading or uh, a random thing in the ceremony is more beneficial to everyone than just having a reading. Now, that being said, obviously, if the couples are big readers or say they love wine, yeah, definitely have a unity ceremony. Definitely add in a reading from like their favorite book. Add in the things that you think will enhance the story. And then my favorite piece of advice is matching the couple's tone. So going back to when you're getting all that information, as you're watching them and observing them, if they are a really funny couple, or if they're very romantic, or if they're kind of in between, if they're like lighthearted, they're not like stand-up comedians, but they're not like bushy gushy, you want to match the tone of that ceremony to them. Now, I'm not saying you have to be a stand-up comedian. It's pretty hard to do that. I once had a couple ask me to do that, and I was like, oh, you don't want me to tell jokes. It doesn't work good. Um, the more you can match that couple's tone, the more the ceremony feels like them. So, for example, if they have a lot of dad jokes, I mean, add them in. It's totally fine. I am ghostwriting a ceremony right now with a dad who does have a lot of dad jokes. And I told him, I was like, nope, we have to have them in there. They want you to officiate because you're the dad and you have a lot of dad jokes, and we need your personality, but also theirs in there too. Like, on not surprisingly, the daughter also does a lot of dad jokes. So the more you can match their tone, the better the ceremony is, because it really will feel like them and not feel like, just a ceremony. Again, obviously, if you're not funny, don't feel like you have to go above and beyond, but you can always run a joke by someone else. And then we're going to weave in the story. I mentioned earlier how one of my biggest pet peeves in wedding ceremonies is how the first part feels like this long monologue, and then like there's rest of the ceremony. It feels a bit like, here's a speech. Yeah, now we do the serious stuff. That doesn't mean you have to make the parts of the ceremony that are serious be loaded with text, but you can add in just little bits of information about the couple to weave in that theme, weave in the stories, tell a bit of that information. For example, during a ring exchange, I've heard a lot of language that's like, the rings are a perfect circle, la la la. Instead of saying something like that, you could instead say something like, uh, the rings are a symbol of where you've come from, how you've met, or your growth, your time spent apart, all the time you spent developing yourselves and developing your relationship and the future and where you guys will go together. You can add in just little snippets or little hints of their story without it being a full-blown story. So that way the beginning doesn't feel like the only personal part, and then the rest is like the rest of the ceremony. Okay, now this is kind of hard, and I don't know if you guys will like this, but if you can, try to bring this sentence to life. It's very telling and not showing. For example, if I were to write a ceremony like this, I might talk about a vacation, or I might talk about a favorite movie or spending time with family. I have a couple that's really big on family, so we talk about in the beginning of the ceremony some of those moments with family and how they tied in family. But if you are brave and want to drop it in the chat, I can give you a moment or two. And please do chat, because otherwise it's just me staring at myself. I'm like, Timothy, I just saw your comment about two DJs getting married, always on the same beat. Okay, I love that. I also love, I think I can call that like kind of punny. I love that it's funny. I love this so much. I'm like, this is great. Anyone else have any ideas of maybe stories they would tell or things they would do instead of saying, they met in college? Whether, I mean, obviously this is a hypothetical couple, but a lot of couples meet in college. So Jessica. Jessica says Taylor's mom knew that Morgan was a match when she would have stopped quoting Harry Potter during dinner. She even did the accents. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. And it's a subtle way to share the story and also their humor. I feel like I tried to do a Harry Potter accent earlier, and I had to stop myself mid-sentence, so I'm not gonna do it again. We'll come back to this. I won't awkwardly make jokes right now because like I said, I'm not a comedian. You don't you don't want to hear me make jokes. Think on it. Come back to it. Come back to me. And now the final part, delivering the ceremony. A lot of our work in officiating, or even if you're just officiating for the first and only time, a lot of it is upfront work. A lot of it's getting to know the couple and writing the ceremony, but there also is a little bit in art in delivering a ceremony and telling a couple story. And sometimes this is where having all of that knowledge about them comes in. The reason I mention that is because when you have all this knowledge about a couple and you know how they interact, you'll also know how to deliver a ceremony. For example, if something goes wrong, like you're doing a unity candle and the candle blows out, you'll know if you should be funny or if you should just pretend it didn't exist. Like if you have a couple that's like quite serious, not like super hilarious, you'll probably just pretend it didn't blow out. But if you have a funny couple, you might want to crack a joke. And by joke, again, doesn't need to be stand up, but a casual little joke or two. So some of the rules of thumb that I have for presenting is have fun. I know no matter how many times I officiate, it's always slightly scary, but I try to have fun with it and I try to have fun with the couple. So that way then I'm also breathing and they're breathing. Don't stress about it. I know, especially if any of you on this call are officiating for the first time, it's pretty easy to stress about it. But especially if you're officiating for the first time or if you're a family friend, guests will understand. They're going to understand if you're nervous or if you forget something or you say something wrong. It's totally fine to laugh it off and go back to what you're reading. I like to write ceremonies in a way that like speaking to the couple or speaking to guests. Um, so, you know, have a similar tone, speak to the couple as if you know them. For example, when they walk down the aisle and there's kind of like that handoff exchange and they're both up there and sometimes crying or laughing or I don't know. Couples always, I think, do weird things in the moment because they're nervous. Off the mic, I'm usually like, "You made it. Okay, we're here." Or I try to give them something reaffirming depending on their tone. So they picked you for a reason, whether you're a family friend or whether you're paid. So feel free to have that moment with them and feel free to talk to them like as if you know them. Because hopefully by this point, especially if you're doing these steps, you should know them and probably more than you'd ever know that you'd ever want to know, to be honest. Um, Something that I always have to work on and I forget, especially even during this, is pause more than you think you should. For example, during the ring exchange, I always like to take like just a second before we exchange rings to pause, let the couple have a moment to get the rings. Don't feel like you need to rush it. Most blocks of time for ceremonies are 30 minutes. You have the 30 minutes, use it, breathe, or tell the couple to breathe. A lot of times I have to tell the couple to breathe and tell them like take a moment. Like we can take a moment for you to breathe. It's okay. Like you don't need to die for this. And if something funny happens, laugh with them. I always say it's not a wedding until the veil falls off because veils never stay on, no matter how much you bobby pin them in there. So sometimes I'll laugh about it. I'll make a joke and be like, "Oh yeah, there goes the veil." Like now we know it's a wedding. Or sometimes you might get guest interaction. I had one guy during a wedding ceremony. I can't even remember the line, but like randomly laughed out loud. And I was like, "Well, you know what that moment was." I was like, "I didn't know it was funny, but good to know." But have fun with it. Interact with the guests if they interact with you, obviously appropriately. Have fun with the couple. I mean, at the end of the day, it's an important moment, but it's not that important. Like in the way of it, have fun, treat it like it's fun. And I think also that will come through in the ceremony as well and kind of amplify to that experience. Like I always tell couples, like it's a serious moment, but it's not so serious where we need to all stop breathing. Like we can have fun, we can make mistakes. It happens. Life goes on. As long as we get you married and you had a good time and we got your names right, like that's the most important part. I mean, there's a lot of others, but those are the highlights. So just to leave you on a favorite quote of mine, all good writing leaves something unexpressed. It goes back to kind of cutting out what doesn't matter, what isn't needed. But I always like to leave and end my ceremonies and have guests thinking about love and life and relationships and, you know, opening with a story that will be the talk at cocktail hour. I like to leave something for people to think about after. So I blew through that way faster than I thought I was going to. Again, I gotta take my own advice and breathe. But any questions people have, because otherwise I will ask questions to all of you and it's gonna get weird.
I was curious. You had said
Yeah.
earlier that you were ghostwriting a ceremony for someone. Is that like a service that you offer? Or is this like a one-off that you're doing?
Oh, yeah, it's become really popular over the last year, 2 years, oddly enough, with the launch of ChatGPT. Yeah, also because I have a lot of planners that like to kind of offboard that process so that way they know also like the family friend is like have someone to hold them accountable. But yeah, it is something I do a lot and I actually really enjoy it because I feel like a third party. And then I get to know all the secrets about a couple, like especially from the family and friend. Like there's some things like I'm like, I really should not have heard this, but it's so fun. It's literally being a fly on the wall.
Oh, that's very funny. How'd you get started with that? So was that kind of just a third option that people were kind of asking, like, or could you just write it and then we'll
Yeah, that's a good question. I wish I knew, to be honest. I think actually maybe a wedding planner asked me, or maybe I did it for someone. I genuinely don't know. I really don't know how I got started, but it's honestly, I mean, I obviously love fishing, but it's probably one of my favorite things to do now because, yeah, you find a lot. I mean, I feel like I hold a lot of secrets in my head, but it's cool to be able to write in different tones and, do more dad jokes than I ever would. So,
definitely.
yeah.
Do you find yourself like almost a little busier like with the rise of Chat GPT? Because I feel like I've heard actually a lot recently about people saying that they've gone to ceremonies and they're like right off the bat, we could tell that they use Chat GPT. So I feel like there was a rise of people using it and then quickly going,
Yeah.
that was a mistake.
Yeah. It's funny because when ChatGPT first came out, it like obviously I think for anyone that officiate professionally, it would just like went down. I was like, give it time. It'll come back because people realize like, oh, everything sounds the same. Um, and now everyone's realizing it does. So now it's actually really busy, especially with ghostwriting. And I think that makes me happy because I'm like, as much as I like ChatGPT for tasks, I do not like it for writing. I sometimes will put my notes about a couple into a ChatGPT and try to get it to create a ceremony. And if it doesn't do better than I do, I'm like, okay, we're still good. We're still working on our skills. We're still good here.
Definitely. Let's see, Jessica did have another question. You mentioned that the tone of the couple, what if you aren't great at humor or not super sentimental yourself? How do you kind of dive in and match
Yeah,
the tone if it's not your forte?
I know it is kind of funny because oddly enough, even though I work in weddings, when I first started, I actually really did not like weddings. And even now, I'm still a little bit like, okay, this is a bit much. So I'm not actually a really sentimental, like romantic person. I guess the best way I can put it is it's kind of like acting. Like I try to write it as if I'm the couple speaking, or I also try to reference things before I write. So every now and then, like I have the couple that's super long distance, they're very philosophical. Like I am to some extent, but not their extent. So they shared some things that they've read and like things that they like. So before I started working on their draft, I was reading through, it's a site called I'm gonna say it wrong. It's gonna sound like marginalized aliens, and that's not it. Margin aliens or something. And it's a philosophical website that just has all these things about life. So I was reading through that and reading, you know, posts and stuff like that and watching very philosophical like videos to get kind of in that mindset. And I find that helps a lot. Humor is a little bit harder. I think that's just something you pick up over time. But I've had couples that are very sarcastic, and we definitely don't do that in a ceremony to some extent. So sometimes we tone it back, depending on the content. Ooh, Virginia.
I was gonna say, so another question.
I'm afraid I might cry just a little. Yes, please cry in the best way. The dad that I'm working with, the dad joke one, we have a joke in there in the beginning that we're getting everyone to cheer like after you'll like do he's doing like an intro like hey thanks for being here yada 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 and then after he's like I'm having him make everyone cheer so you can have a moment to like stop crying and he's poking fun at himself and gonna say like so I have a moment to stop crying um let's all cheer but I will say like we're here for the tears. I think it's weird especially if you're a family member and you don't have any emotion, especially if you're a mom, like it would help. So yeah, obviously cry it out. If you need a moment, everyone will understand and support you. Yeah, have the emotions. You should. I would hope. It's better to have emotions than be not emotional.
I'm Jessica Rowe. Do you ever show the couple what you write for the script before the wedding day, or do you make it a surprise every time?
Oddly enough, I would say like 99.9% of couples I do show. Which I know is a very big difference if you're like a professional, a lot of professionals don't. But I think maybe it's because of the process that I have. A lot of people actually kind of like knowing and being part of it because I think it is kind of a reflective process. And obviously it takes out a little bit of the emotion of like this shock and surprise. But I think at the same time, especially nowadays with the rise of AI and ChatGPT, couples have really like enjoyed knowing what's gonna be in their ceremony and making sure it's correct, it's factual, the tone is correct. You know, even though I say match couples tone, I'm not always right on the first try. Especially with humor, sometimes, especially on a first draft, I'll go like way above and beyond the humor so I can dial it back. It's harder to do it the other way. But every now and then, like I have a couple that I'm meeting with after this, they don't want to see the ceremony, so I'm asking them a lot of questions to make sure. So yeah.
Definitely. I can see that kind of almost helping with in case there was an overshare moment of, oh, that was supposed to stay between the couple and I didn't know, but they already saw the script, so they know what's in there. They're not
Yeah.
gonna be any unhappy surprises.
Yes, yeah. I'm usually pretty, and I think if you're doing this as a job, like you usually know what is an overshare and what is an overtime. You kind of learn it, but every now and then, a couple has different purposes. They might be like, just kidding, we don't want to talk about us meeting on Tinder, I don't know, whatever the popular dating app is at the moment of writing.
I think that's a common one.
Yeah, yeah. Any other questions? Since
Does
you guys
any
are,
other questions from the audience? I've got some myself, so length, that is exactly what I was gonna ask Jessica. I was gonna
yeah,
say, what is the most common length that people are wanting to see from your story-led ceremonies?
typically I try to get between 5 to 6 pages. Now, granted, I think it's in like a very cute like font and everything they write in because I don't know. I guess I feel like that makes me like, ooh, writing. And that's with like 1.15 spacing, but it's typically about 5 to 6. Depending on the couple's vows. Like I will tell couples, like I'd rather, don't cut vows. This is your ceremony. Like take as long as you need. If I have to cut the ceremony, I'd rather do that. So typically about 5 to 6 pages, which tends to be about 15, 25 minutes, depending on what it is. So yeah,
15, 25 minutes. Okay, that makes sense. And
depending.
Jessica's follow-up question was, when couples write their own vows, do you read them before the wedding for, to help with the timing or just let it happen?
Oh, yeah. Most of the time, yes, because at least for me, part of my selling point, that sounds weird. Part of where it can come in handy is writing vows, oddly enough, for someone not being sentimental. So typically I'm already part of that process and have an idea. Every now and then I have couples that are like, yeah, we finished it. And I'm like, do you want to show me? And sometimes they don't. Ideally, yes, because for example, if they do seem like they're gonna run on the like longer end where it's like 5+ minutes, then I will cut the ceremony because I really like, or if I think the couple's like gonna be a big crier, sometimes I can tell, then I definitely cut because I'm like, we need to give you a moment for the tears and not make you feel rushed.
Definitely. All right, Timothy just asked, let's see, it's a longer one. I like getting to learn the couple to craft a great story and doing, as you mentioned, but I had a couple that got within a week of the ceremony and called everything off. Since then, they have reconciled and have called me back about doing
That's okay. I'm
in the
reading. Yeah.
coming months. How would you manage that? How would you take on that situation?
Yeah, I guess, well, I have a couple. I mean, it depends. I also have a lot of questions like, do they have a date? Do they want something custom, yada yada. It depends on the situation. But sometimes, so for example, I have a couple that broke up for, I can't remember how long it's been. Like, we don't really talk about it in the ceremony, but like 6 months or a year or something. And we don't necessarily bring that up, but a lot of times, especially when couples have gone through hard patches, or I've had a lot of other things that have happened to couples that I'm not going to bring up because, you know, really personal. A lot of times during a ceremony, we talk just an overview of those rough patches of like, they went through tough times. They like were going through this or that, not necessarily calling out like they called off the wedding, but more like, marriage is scary, love is scary. Sometimes you're not really sure and you're not really positive. And then, for example, this couple, we bring that up. Like marriage is really scary. Like you don't know the future and you're promising a future to someone, and sometimes that takes time to work through. And those are the things that when you do get married, you're like, okay, yeah, actually, I feel really good about this. So there's ways to craft it and ways that make it more sentimental or funny, depending on the couple. That's typically the kind of language, something around that I use. Like I try to figure out like what did a couple learn or what happened in that situation and be like, okay, what does this mean for their marriage? What does the future look like? Why are they stronger with it? So obviously, again, really dependent on the situation. But hopefully that helps. Yeah. yeah, it's interesting how many couples go through. A lot of couples go through rough patches, and I do like to talk about them because I'm like, I know it made you stronger. So let's talk about how.
Yeah, there's definitely a way to spin it for a positive and the updated script, maybe.
Yeah. Ooh, what do I hold my script? Oh, you know what? Actually, I used to use an iPad, but the older I've gotten, the harder the glare is on my eyeballs. So I actually use a Kindle now. It's like actually it's like about this size. I don't really appreciate the Amazon advertising, so I try to like hold it like this. But I find that's helpful because it doesn't have glare. And then typically by the DJ or in my pocket, depending on what I'm wearing, because women's clothing doesn't always have pockets, I'll keep a phone nearby just to have it offline in case the Kindle dies. It doesn't really happen, but I like that because when I was younger and once tried to do a boat wedding with a piece of paper and a binder, wouldn't recommend. Wouldn't recommend. They were in the paper was in there, but like, blows around and they had a hand fasting and it was like a whole thing. So
Oh man.
yeah, it was thankfully I was just getting started.
Let's see. Yamala had a question. She lost her voice. She was asked to marry a couple in December. The theme is Winter Wonderland. I try to ask questions to see what I could come up with and drawing some blanks. How do you recommend approaching that script?
Ooh, oh, good question. Also, I don't know if you lost your voice right now, but I feel your pain. I just got over the flu. Uh, Winter Wonderland. Okay, I'd have to see what they come up with, to be totally honest. I think it goes back to the story thing of like, if you're not getting enough from a couple, don't be afraid to ask for more. Like I will tell couples up front, like, if I need more information, I'm gonna ask you for it. Like this is private between us. Like I'm not gonna go tell someone like so broke up. Like I'm not gonna tell you exactly who that is, but I feel like if you're coming up with a blank or if it feels very baseline, ask them the questions about feelings. If you're like, oh, like every couple tries to say like, oh, we're so boring. We like, met through friends. We just hang out and blah blah blah. But usually people are more exciting than they think. If you want to tie it to the theme of Winter Wonderland in general, then ooh, that's a good question. Depends on where your winter is. If you're in the Midwest, like I'm originally from, there's something kind of magical about winter and like getting married in winter and how quiet and peaceful winter is. You can kind of tie it back into that if the couple's like that. Like sometimes the surroundings that a couple's getting married in says a lot about who they are and their wedding. Like I have a wedding in December as well. And yeah. Ooh, keep it short and simple. Yeah, you can do that. Don't worry. You could just briefly talk about their surroundings, especially if they're a couple that doesn't want to share stuff. And yes, check out the ceremony scripts that will help you, or feel free to reach out. I'm also happy to suggest things. It's in the best way hard to tell exactly what to do without knowing the story. So
I am curious. I know you mentioned earlier about a video form that you have people
I
do. Is
do.
that like you send them a video or they send you a video? And how does that work?
Oh, it's I get no kickback from this, so I'm gonna type it in the chat. It's I think there's competitors of this too that are cheaper, but it's a product called Video Ask. It's made by Typeform, but basically like there's a video of me asking the question and then they can respond in a video or audio. I don't allow text because I'm like, I need to know if this moment was funny and people are really bad. Like this is why I don't like sending out um paper questionnaires because I can't tell like people are usually not good at writing. And so I can't tell if something was funny or like what a moment it was. People, it might be weird at first. I'll have a lot of people be like a video form and then they do and they actually kind of like it, but people will tell you some stuff in that video. So yeah, when they submit the form, like I get all the videos back and it also transcribes it too if I just want to like look at the text of it, but it's highly entertaining.
I
Very
love that idea. All right, I think Jessica's got the last question, then we'll wrap up for today. But how many drafts of a ceremony script do you usually do?
yeah, good question. I've gotten a lot faster as I've gotten older and gotten like better at figuring out a couple pretty fast, but typically like 3 to 4-ish. I mean, it gets easier obviously with each draft. The first draft I always call the crap draft where I'm like just like word vomit, and then after that it gets a lot easier. So typically like 3 to 4, and as it goes, it's usually just minor edits of like changing up words and stuff like that. Every now and then I have to do a rehaul of something if I like, yeah, got that off, got the tone off or something, but typically 3 to 4. So oh, Aaron, it's videoask.com. It's really good. I know they have like a competitor too. I think this is the more expensive one, but Highly recommend it. It's a good time. I mean, if anything, at least it's just entertaining. So, and then I usually see those people at the wedding, and then I'm like, oh yeah, Bob, that was you.
I love that. That's such a great idea. I'm definitely writing that one down for later because I definitely think that people tend to kind of, even if they ramble on more, that you might find some gold in there. So
Yeah, or it's just nice to be able to recognize people and be like, oh, you're the one that told me that story. Oh, you're the mom. Like, and then they kind of recognize your face, so you're not like just a weird rando officiating. So it's very entertaining. But anywho.
great. Well, I think that covers all the questions we had. So that's about our time. So thank you so much, Liz. That was a fantastic presentation. And thanks everybody for showing up. If you enjoyed this class, be sure to attend one of our live events with Officiant Accelerator. It's an in-person event series by AMM in partnership with IPWO, where you can learn how to deliver powerful ceremonies, build a successful practice in your community, and join a network of passionate wedding professionals in a city near you. We're headed to Chicago in September and Jacksonville, Florida in October. So be sure to get your tickets as soon as possible at the AMM store or the Officiant Accelerator website at officiantaccelerator.com. Liz has actually been one of our key speakers back in the past. She did our Chicago tour back in 2023. So it's a great time for everyone to come out and just get to know everyone in their area. So, but that's about it. Thank you so much, Liz. That was a fantastic presentation. And thanks everybody for showing up.
Thank you all. Thanks for giving an hour. I appreciate it.